Hey guys, subscribers will know that on this channel we are all about backups. So today we're going to be taking a look at Backblaze's B2 storage. So just before we begin, I'll just mention that Backblaze is not a sponsor of this video, nor are they currently a sponsor of this channel. I've switched over to them because I think they're really good, and everything that we're about to talk about is my personal opinion. So I've been taking cloud backups of my storage for several years, and Backblaze is not new to the party, so why have I never looked at them before? Well, to be quite honest with you, I was quite happy with my existing backup solution. The idea behind a good cloud backup solution is it's a kind of fire and forget. You set it up once and you can rely on it just auto-magically happening in the background without ever having to look at it. The most that I would ever do is just validate that my backups were in fact complete and that the data was being stored correctly, i.e. I could download it again and the data wasn't corrupt or didn't have some sort of problem. And I was quite happy with that solution. It was not too expensive and my eyes just didn't wander anywhere else. Why now am I looking at changing cloud providers if I was so happy before? Well, I'm about to move continents and I am a big fan of the 3-2-1 backup solution. So that is, you should have 3 copies of your data, 2 of them should be redundant copies, and at least 1 of them should be an off-site backup. But the practicalities of the move mean that the 2 copies that I have locally here in my apartment are all going to be packed away and put on a ship. And that ship is going to have to go from Europe, where I am now, into the United States, where I'm moving to. And while there's a reasonably good chance that it will arrive at its destination with no damage whatsoever, I have a natural mistrust of shipping companies when they're shipping hard drives and other data storage solutions, because basically I have opened up enough computers that have been damaged in shipping not to want to risk 2 of 3 copies of my data with them. Hence, I've decided to back up to a second cloud solution. That way I'll have a second redundant copy just in case something was to happen. So why did I choose Backblaze? Well, 1, TrueNAS integrates with them quite natively, making the setup very, very easy. 2, they have a really good reputation within the industry. And 3, they're one of the cheapest providers out there. Remember, I'll be paying for 2 cloud storage solutions for the foreseeable future, so cost was a significant factor for me here. So how do we get set up with Backblaze? Well, let's take a look. So the very first thing we're going to do once we log into our Backblaze account is create a bucket. A bucket is just a container for us to store data in, and you can see that I already have a couple of buckets that are storing my real backups. You can have up to 100 buckets per Backblaze account, and I'm going to go ahead and create another one here just for the purpose of this video. So you can go ahead and hit create a bucket, and that'll prompt you with a new window. That new window is going to ask us for a couple of pieces of information. The very first one is it's going to ask us for the unique name of the bucket. Now, bucket names have to be globally unique, not account unique. That means you need to specify a name that no one else with a Backblaze account has ever used. So we're going to go ahead here and specify test-youtube-test 1 2 3 4 5, which is a name that probably no one has used before, but we'll find out. The other options on this page include asking whether or not we want to make the files in the bucket private or public. These are my private files. I don't intend to share them with anyone else, so I'm going to leave them as private. The next option here is about default encryption, which we're actually going to leave disabled. Many of you will be surprised to hear me say that because you'll be thinking, Steve, we definitely should be encrypting our backup data. And you're absolutely right. It's just that we're going to do it ourselves using an encryption key that we manage later on in the process. Enabling this option asks Backblaze to create and manage and use an encryption key for the bucket on your behalf. The downside there is that Backblaze then also has the encryption key and they can use it to decrypt your data. You absolutely can enable this option if you want to be encrypted multiple times, but it's probably not necessary because the encryption that we'll use is going to be quite strong, and also Backblaze already encrypts its data at rest, so it's probably overkill. If you're extremely worried, you can definitely turn this on. And the last option that we've got here is a feature called Object Lock, which prevents some objects from being written to for a specified period of time. It's designed to stop certain objects from being overwritten. I'm not interested in that feature, so we're going to skip that and just go ahead and hit create bucket. And you can see here the bucket is successfully created on our account. Once the bucket is created, we're going to go ahead here and choose the lifecycle settings option. And in this pop-up menu, we're going to define how long the data in the bucket is kept for. It's a backup, Steve. Surely we want to keep it forever. Well, this setting also controls the versioning for each file. So if you've got a file that you write to or update very, very often, like a Word document or Excel sheets, etc., 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 Backblaze will keep a copy of each historical version as well. It's very convenient if you want to roll back to an older version, but it's quite inconvenient because it continues to use more and more storage as more and more versions of the same file get uploaded over and over and over again. So this setting allows us to control what we do with those historical versions. By default, Backblaze will try to keep every single historical version, but you can also keep only the latest version of the file, or you can specify that you want to keep prior versions of the file for X number of days. Personally, I keep prior versions of any sort of data or files for up to 14 days. That gives me a good chance of going back and restoring historical versions if I need to, without consuming too much of my storage. But remember, in TrueNAS we also have snapshots, and the purpose of a snapshot is to allow us to roll back to a historical version if we need to as well. So that is the primary way that I would normally roll back my data if I needed to. So I don't need to keep a lot of versions in my Backblaze backup. You can also use custom lifecycle rules, but 14 days is perfect for me. So as I said, I'm just going to specify here to keep prior versions for 14 days, and then I'm just going to go ahead and hit update bucket. So that change has been updated there now. Now that the bucket that we're going to use for our storage has been created, I'm going to suggest that we take a look at our caps and alerts page. You can see that here on the left-hand side. This page may look slightly different for you if you have just set up your Backblaze account and have not yet set up your billing. But once you do set up your billing, it unlocks one of the best features on Backblaze in my opinion. You can edit the caps by clicking this Edit Caps option here, and it allows you to specify how much money you're willing to spend per day on each of its services. So the 4 services are storage, download bandwidth, class B transactions, and class C transactions. You can specify that there should be no cap whatsoever, but I've gone ahead and said that I would like a limit of 25 cents a day on my storage capacity and 0 cents on all of the other options here. This feature is great for 2 reasons. The first is it prevents me from spending way more money than I intend. So for example, on the storage side of things, I've set a maximum cap of 25 cents per day. This means that if I accidentally misconfigure my backup solution and start uploading 2 or 3 times the data that I intend to, I won't accidentally get 2 or 3 times the bill. It will hit the maximum amount of storage and ask me to raise the cap. At that stage, I can go in and take a look at what has gone wrong. It's important to note that setting the cap here does not mean that you will be charged that per day. I'm still only charged for the amount I use. In my case, it's about 850 gigs, which means I'm being charged about 14 cents a day. For the other services like the daily download bandwidth caps and the daily class B and C transactions, I've set those to 0 cents a day. That means that I won't ever exceed the free limits unless I intentionally go in, raise the cap, and control how much I'm spending. Because of how expensive downloading data is from most cloud storage providers, the daily download cap is particularly useful. Because of the ways that you can configure TrueNAS to download data from your cloud provider, this helps have ultra granular control over how much you're willing to spend. Really excellent feature, I think. The second reason that this is a particularly useful page is because of this send alerts to option on the right hand side. You have the option to send alerts to both your mobile phone or your email address when you're hitting 75% and 100% of your cap. It will notify you and let you know. Now that we're comfortable with the amount of money that we're going to be spending on Backblaze, we're going to go ahead here and create an app key. The app key is used by TrueNAS to communicate with Backblaze and authenticate on your behalf. If we go ahead and hit app keys here on the left hand side, we get the option to generate a new master application key or add a new application key entirely. The master application key is a key that gives root access to your Backblaze account, so it's something that you should give out very, very sparingly. Now, I have complete control over the account. I have complete control over my TrueNAS system, so I am not necessarily concerned about putting these keys into the TrueNAS system itself. However, it would be quite good practice to create a new application key that only gives the minimum amount of access needed to your account. So that's what we're going to do here. Once I hit add a new application key, it's going to ask me for a number of options. The very first one is what I'd like the name of the key to be. So unlike bucket names that have to be globally unique within Backblaze, I can add an application key name that is a count unique, i.e. any string that is not used for another application key within my account. For me, I'm just going to go ahead and specify test-YouTube. The next option here is it's asking me which buckets I would allow access to. By default, it has all selected, but I'm going to go ahead and specify the specific bucket that I'll be making my backups to. Selecting the specific bucket that this application key has access to allows me to follow the principle of least privilege. I.e., if somebody ever manages to compromise this key, I'll have limited the blast radius just to the bucket that I'm using for the backups and not to all of the buckets on my Backblaze account. Still bad, but slightly less bad than giving the attacker keys to absolutely everything. Again, your mileage may vary and it's up to you to decide what your level of risk should be. The next option here is the type of access that this key will have. You can specify read and write, read only, or write only. Because this is a backup process where I'm going to have to be able to read the data that's already backed up and write to the bucket, I'm going to leave that on read and write. The next option is to allow it to list all bucket names. So it's not necessarily going to have access to the other buckets, but it could get the names of each of the other buckets. There is no real need for me to grant that to this particular application key. TrueNAS will never need to know what the other bucket names are. But again, your mileage may vary here in terms of risk and what you're doing specifically. Then we have two options to specify the file name prefix. If you'd like every file that's uploaded to this particular bucket using this application key to have a prefix, you can specify that prefix here. And then the final option is the duration in seconds. It's not especially clear from the interface what the duration seconds is meant to be, but it's actually the amount of time in seconds that authentication will be valid for. So if you specify 60 seconds here, the authentication will be valid for 60 seconds. Because our backup process is likely to take a very, very long time, I'm not going to set a limit here, but this can be useful if you'd like to cut off the connection after X amount of time. Once we've specified all of our settings, we can go ahead and hit create a new key. Now, what that's going to do is create an application key here at the bottom where it gives you the key ID, the key name, and the application key. This will only be shown once, so you should copy this to your clipboard and then paste it somewhere safe. And remember, if you paste it to your clipboard during the setup process, you have to go and delete it from your clipboard once you've completed your setup process. Otherwise, your application key is just on your desktop waiting for anyone to go and steal it. Now that we have everything set up on the Backblaze side of things, we can go ahead and do the TrueNAS setup. So on the left-hand side, we're going to go ahead and open System and then scroll down to Cloud Credentials. You can see here I already have my existing application keys for Backblaze set up, but I'm going to go ahead and add the new application key that I just created by hitting the blue Add button on the top right-hand side. This asks me for a number of the usual options, so the very first thing that I can specify is the name. Again, I'm going to go ahead and type in Backblaze and then -test. That lets me know that this is the test key for this video. Then the provider in the drop-down menu defaults to Amazon S3, but if we open that up here, we can see that we can select Backblaze B2 as well as a number of other options, which we won't go into now. Then on the top right-hand side, we're going to go ahead and specify both the key ID and the application key. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in here from my clipboard, and then my application key as well. Once I've got both of those in here, I can hit the Verify Credential button, and TrueNAS will try and connect. It tells me that the credential is valid, so I can close that and then hit Submit. If you saved your application key by copying it to your clipboard and pasting it into a notepad file in the last step, now is the time to both go in and remove it from the notepad file and copy some other random text into your clipboard. You don't need the application key anymore. It's saved safely on your TrueNAS system. And in the worst case scenario where all is lost, you can easily go in and create a new application key in the Backblaze system. Now that our cloud credentials are saved, we can go ahead and set up a backup task. So on the left-hand side, the tasks menu, we can go ahead and select the cloud sync tasks. You can see here I have multiple cloud sync tasks already running. One of them is running as we speak, but we're going to go ahead and set up a new task. So I'm going to hit the blue add button here on the left hand side, and then we're going to get prompted for a number of options. The first option that we're prompted with here is the description of this particular task. You can put in a description that makes sense for you. I'm just going to call this Backblaze-test for the moment. The next is the direction that we would like the data to flow. So by default, it's set to pull from the destination into TrueNAS, but we actually wanted to push data from TrueNAS to the destination, which in this case is Backblaze. Then we get the option for the transfer mode, and you have three options here. We have sync, copy, and move. Pay attention here, guys, because choosing the wrong setting here might result in unexpected data loss. Choosing the copy option means it will copy all of the files from your source TrueNAS system to the destination, which is Backblaze, but it will overwrite files in the destination that has the same name as the source files. So if you have a file called test1 on your TrueNAS system, and there's a test1 file in the destination system, the copy function will overwrite the file in the destination system. It will not delete files and folders that have been deleted, so this is really more of a push config and retains the most amount of data. The sync option will take a look at all of the files that are on the destination and all of the files that are in your source, and it will sync the changes between the two. That means if you delete a file on your TrueNAS system, it will also be deleted at the destination, in this case Backblaze. And the move option will take all of the files on your TrueNAS system and it will remove them and put them in the Backblaze service. So that means that you will no longer have those files on the TrueNAS system. They will exist only in Backblaze. For me, I am choosing copy because it is the option that most suits my needs. Once I've selected copy, I can go ahead and select which directory I'd like to back up. So for the purpose of this particular test, I'd like to go into my media folder, into my TV shows, and maybe back up my favorite TV show to my cloud service, in this case, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Before we look at the options at the bottom, we're just going to span over here to the right-hand side and select the credentials for Backblaze that we created previously, which is the Backblaze-test credentials here. And then we get prompted for a number of other options. So TrueNAS is going to go ahead and ask us which bucket we'd like to back up to, and because we specified that the app key only has access to one bucket, that's the only option I have to select here. We can then specify a specific folder or destination within that bucket, but because there are no other files in the bucket already, there's nothing for me to specify. I'm just going to put it at the root access here. Then if we scroll down to the bottom, we can see that we've got a number of options for control. The very first option is how often we'd like to back up the service. You can choose whichever frequency suits you. For my particular purposes, I like to do a weekly backup that starts on Sundays at 12 a.m. That suits me just fine. We'll leave the enabled checkbox enabled so that the task actually runs, and then we've got a number of advanced options. One of them is to take a snapshot before the backup begins, and I like to do that just to ensure that we're taking both snapshots and doing a backup as well, in case we ever have to do some sort of rollback there. The next couple of options for following symlinks and specifying some pre and postscript options are outside of the scope of this particular video. If you're not sure what those do, then it's perfectly fine to leave them empty. You don't need to worry about them in most cases. The next option here is the upload chunk size, which is specified by default as 96 megabytes. No, that's not my accent. I'm not saying megabyte with a G. I'm saying megabyte, which is ever so slightly smaller than a megabyte. So when transferring data between two systems, your data is broken up into smaller chunks and moved chunk by chunk instead of moving an entire file or folder at once. Here you can specify the size of those chunks, and in theory increasing the chunk size could make the transfer process a little bit faster or smoother because there are less chunks to transfer. The bigger the chunk, the less there are to transfer. The downside there is that there is a greater risk that each individual chunk will fail to transfer. You can imagine if the chunk size was over 500 gigabytes, for example, the chance of that successfully transferring is very, very low. I've played around with this setting quite a bit and I haven't managed to find a way to increase the speed of my backups, so I generally leave this at the 96 megabyte default. But your mileage may vary and you can feel free to choose your own chunk size here. The next option here is to use the -fastlist option to increase the speed of your transfers at the trade-off of using more RAM. If you've got RAM to spare, this is a really excellent option to choose. But if you don't have RAM to spare, then you can leave this disabled and your transfers will take slightly longer. The next option here is remote encryption. We're going to enable that because we would like to encrypt our files and folders before we send it to Backblaze. That means that even Backblaze won't know what we're storing on their servers. That exposes a number of other options, including file name encryption, which is enabled by default. We're going to leave it that way. That'll encrypt the file names as well as the files themselves. So even looking at the files, you're not going to be able to determine what is being stored in the folder itself. The next thing you're asked to specify here is your encryption password and your encryption salt. Now these are alphanumeric strings that you can specify yourself, and good practice would dictate that they should be at least 20 characters long for maximum security. Now these are the keys to your kingdom. They're used to encrypt and decrypt your data, both before you send it to Backblaze and after you retrieve it from Backblaze. So you need to store these in a safe and secure place where you won't lose them. If you do lose them, you will not be able to decrypt your data once you have retrieved it from Backblaze. Or if they're compromised in some way, somebody else might be able to retrieve your data and decrypt it themselves, in which case your data will be compromised. So extremely important that these are in a safe and secure space. For the purpose of the demo, I'm just going to specify an encryption password of 12345 and an encryption salt of 12345. Again, yours should be much longer and more secure, and I recommend at least 20 characters, but for the purpose of this demo, 12345 is perfectly acceptable. The final two options that you can specify here is the transfers and the bandwidth limit. So the number of transfers is the number of files that can be transferred simultaneously. Your mileage may vary here once again, and you can choose your own limits or refuse to specify a limit at all. And I believe it'll default to somewhere around 20. My own personal experience, I've found that about 40 to 60 files is a nice sweet spot for speed versus not consuming too many resources on my TrueNAS system. Once again, your mileage may vary. Bandwidth limit actually allows us a great amount of flexibility in specifying those limits, because you can specify an upload limit, a download limit, and a time of day at which those limits should be applied. I'm going to be running my backups in the middle of the night when nobody else is going to be using my connection, so I'm not going to specify any sort of limit here. I'd like the backup to be completed very, very quickly using the most available resources. But if you did want to limit it somehow, this is the field that you would use to do that. Once I'm satisfied that all of my options are correct, I can go ahead and hit submit. Then I'll be brought back to my Cloud Sync tasks, where I'll see that the task has been created, but it has not run since the last boot. So rather than relying that everything is done correctly, I'm going to go ahead and try to do a dry run of the upload process. That will allow me to see if TrueNAS can connect correctly to Backblaze and whether or not it would successfully upload any of the data. So I can click the little arrow on the right hand side, expanding my options menu here, and then I get the option for a dry run. When I hit dry run, it'll ask me if I want to do a test, and I can just go ahead and hit continue here. Now it is important to know that no data will be sent or received. We're just checking our connection here. So when I hit the close button here, we'll see that this is running, but it's not actually doing anything. It'll shortly show me a success message. If I click on the success message, I'll get a nice notice that a lot of my data would have been uploaded correctly. It shows me exactly what files and folders it would have thrown to Backblaze. So now I have a backup task that will run weekly on a Sunday, but it's going to be quite some time before that runs again. So what I'm going to do now is run the backup now and take a look at my data that's been backed up to Backblaze, verify that everything is there safely, and then rely on the Cloud Sync task running every week for future backups. So I can go ahead here and click the Run Now button, and it'll ask me if I want to do that. When I hit continue, it will tell me that the task has started. So now it's going to show me this running option, and if I click on that running button here, it will tell me how far in the process it's gotten, how much data it has to upload, and an approximate ETA. I'm uploading about 25 gigs, which on my connection is probably going to take about 2 to 3 hours. We don't have to wait that long to check that the process is in fact working, though. If we go back to our Backblaze account, we can go ahead here and click on Browse Files on the left hand side, and that will display for us all of our buckets, including the size that's been stored on each of them. So we can see here my test-YouTube bucket already has 22 gigabytes uploaded because it's been running now for an hour or two. Once we click in, we can see that even the file names themselves are encrypted. They look like gobbledygook. So now even Backblaze won't know about my obsession with Andy Samberg and Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Once the Cloud Sync task has completed, you'll see a success message here on the dashboard, and clicking that success message will allow you to analyze what has been uploaded. You can also download some logs there if you'd like to take a more detailed view. That's it, guys. We've successfully set up our Cloud Sync task to back up to Backblaze every Sunday. So if I could get you guys to go ahead and do the YouTube dance, which is to like, comment, and subscribe, that will ensure that you do not miss out on any future content that we put up on the channel. Otherwise, I will catch you guys on the flip side.